There you go. Good morning and welcome to the budget workshop of the Board of Trustees. I will turn it over to the President and Dan Durbin, CFO.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had a safe and somewhat relaxing Memorial Day weekend, and we are ready to present to you some preliminary work on our budget that we will act on in June. So without any further ado, Madam Chair, if it's okay with you, if there's no other comments, I'm going to turn it over to our CFO, Dan Durbin.
That sounds great to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me put something up on the screen. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
I can.
Good. Okay, good. We have a lot to cover, and I'll try to be as brief but as concise as possible. What we'd like to do today is to focus on the 2021 or 2021 budget, but I think in order to do that, it would serve us well to look at where we're at today from a financial standpoint and where we're projecting to be at June 30th, because a lot of the 21 budget is a continuation of some activities from the current year. So one kind of melts into the other. So we'll start with what we'd like to do is go through the 20 budget status as of today and through June 30th, then also look at FY21, a general overview of the budget itself, identify some challenges that we're facing and how we plan to meet those challenges, and also get the board's input into some guardrails or some guidelines in terms of how we plan to meet those challenges, to make sure that we're all on the same page so that we have a good framework set for a formal approval of a budget in June. So from a 2020 standpoint, an update through where we're at now, just as a historical perspective, remember we were trending well and on plan through the end of March, and then COVID-19 emerged along with about $39 million worth of potential adverse financial impacts that COVID-19 could have at the university. So in very short order, actually mid-March, we brought a group of about 50 leaders together from across the university, and we developed a risk assessment. What could go wrong and what would we do to fix it? And within 30 days of the development of that plan and that risk assessment, we implemented that plan. And that's exactly where we're at today, is we are in implementation mode. And the plan itself, just as a refresher, the plan identified about $39 million worth of risks, ranging from the fact that we could not have face-to-face or in-person classes during the summer, clinical losses, refunds for both housing and meals, and we developed plans to counter those risks. We implemented some spending curtailments on both personnel and non-personnel and non-essential costs. We converted about 550 summer courses that were traditionally face-to-face to online, and we also implemented some salary reductions and some other adjustments to employee benefits, namely retirement. So we have implemented all of these. We're in implementation mode. And I think what we'll see as we compare the actual to budget through the end of April, we'll see that we're back on track. You know, at one point we were veering off because of the 39 million, but we're back on track. You know, for example, we're about 83% of the year's complete. And thus far, through the end of April, our total revenues are trending at about 90% of budget, the 1.1 as opposed to the 1.2 annual budget. And our expenses are at about 83% or 84, about right under 85%. So we are still positive through April, about 67 million. When you compare that to the trend of last year, we were about 47 million. So we're about 20 million better this year compared to last year on a bottom line, and this is basically a cash basis. Now, this 67 will get burned away over the next couple of months. Okay, so we will not have a $67 million positive margin at the end of the year, because again, you know, we have spikes in revenues in the fall and the spring, and then we burn those dollars out as the year goes on. So Again,
And this is Mary.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, Diane and I have some benefit of some of the sausage making as you've been working through this, and I applaud you for pulling all this together in such an easy to digest way, given the complexity of what you all have been through. But you just mentioned, that was one of my questions, whether this was cash or accrual. But what about the housing fees, meal plan refunds? Are those reflected in this yet, or are those going to hit us in the next couple of months?
the housing plan refunds are up here. Actually, that's one of the reasons why the auxiliary is over budget, because we have the housing plan refunds. The refunds went out, but the CARES Act dollars were not received until May. Those will go back in and reimburse that to bring that down. So we have made the housing plan refunds. We are in the process of making the meal plan refunds and some parking refunds, but the only thing that really hit in April were the housing plans.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And just a little, kind of one layer down of detail, we always want to make sure that we explain where we have variances in both revenues and expenses. And that's basically what this slide does, is explain to, kind of where we're at in terms of some variances from budget and some changes from last year. And as we cycle to cash, our cash position has, for the most part, with the exception of 1 month in November, our monthly cash position has been better than the year before, and last year was better than the year before. So we're gaining strength in cash position. And that's, frankly, liquidity's been a challenge for us for quite a while. So the good news is we are gaining strength. And the way I look at it is, cash buys us time, cash buys us security, cash gets us through this. So one of our laser focuses has been to make sure that we optimize our cash in the bank to be able to meet challenges. And frankly, that's one of the reasons that we were so aggressive on the $39 million plan. And again, you'll see we ended the month of April about 151 million, and just like the other years, that'll start to cycle down. And I would expect cash to end up somewhere around last year's number, maybe just a little less, probably not a little more, but at least probably about 115 million to 126 million. But again, just because of the spikes, we receive cash here and we receive cash here, and then we spend it down as the semesters progress. So I think, from a cash perspective, we'll be pretty close to where we ended last year. And I also wanted to provide an update on the $39 million mitigation strategy that I spoke about a few moments ago. Again, we are in full implementation mode, and we expect each and every one of those implementation strategies to either perform as expected or better. For example, we've already implemented the pay cuts, and you saw some of that I'll go back a little, you saw some of that here. In the differences between last year and this year in the salary payout. We're way down from last year because we had a coach payout last year, but that was only about 6.5 million, but we're down 7.4. And one of the reasons is we're spending less in the salary and fringe categories, again, because of some of the mitigation strategies. Summer classes, we've moved those online. Actually, summer enrollment's pretty strong. We have received the CARES Act money. So we've both for us and the students, but in this, from the mitigation standpoint, we're only counting the institutional piece of the CARES Act money. We've limited the travel and other spending. That's on track, and all the other items are as expected. So if I as a CFO had to give kind of my professional opinion on what I thought the year looked like, or how we were going to end the year, I would say it's on plan. We're back on budget, and equilibrium's been restored. And what I mean by equilibrium is we are back on a balanced budget. Revenues in should at least cover expenses out. So I think for FY20, we will end the year in good shape. Okay. Any questions on the current year? Okay. I should also mention, I apologize for forgetting this, but Rick Grisarik, our AVP for Planning and Budget, is with me today, and Rick and I will alternate back and forth on this. So if you see another face pop up and another voice, it's Rick. So Rick has done an extraordinary amount of heavy lifting to get us to where we're at today, and I think the board deserves to hear from Rick and hear the product of his good work. So, okay. So with that in mind, let's move into the 2021 budget. And as part of this, I'd like, I know we have some new board members, and I apologize for covering kind of the same thing that we've covered in the past with some of the existing board members, but I did want to level set. And what I mean by level set is I just wanted to talk a little bit about what are we budgeting first in terms of our revenues. We have a total revenue budget of about $1.2 billion. And if you think of it very kind of simplistically, it consists of that 1.2 billion consists of restricted funds and more unrestricted funds. And the restricted funds appear in the blue: grants and contracts, clinical dollars that support clinical enterprises, athletics, and then other revenues that are, for example, resident reimbursements from the hospital and other healthcare entities and things like that. And that represents about $711 million, or about 60% of our budget. Then on the right-hand side of the pie, and pardon me, I may talk about later on about the right-hand side of the pie, because the right-hand side of the pie is very important, because those are our most fungible, unrestricted dollars. And it's about $515 million, and it consists of tuition and fees that you'll see here, state appropriations, and some auxiliaries. Okay. So as we prepare the budget, as we prepare the budget, there's different activities and different drivers of the budget itself. And for example, on the left-hand side of the pie, those restricted dollars are basically budgeted, and those budgets are initiated at the unit level. So in other words, the units budget their grants, the units budget their clinical dollars, and they push that budget from the bottom up, if you will, in terms of determining what revenues and what expenses are going to be on those funds. On the right-hand side of the pie, the revenues that we have to authorize expense budgets to the college, those are pushed from the top down. And what I mean by that is, we as a university, you as a board of trustees will approve a tuition and fee rates. We in turn estimate what that will generate, and we set expense budgets. So we push those budgets down to units. They converge in the budget office, where they're validated. You know, the assumptions that the colleges use for grants and clinical dollars and those type of things are validated for reasonableness, for accuracy, and from the dollars that we push down from a central level for tuition and fees and state appropriations, they're balanced. We make sure that they balance to the right amount. So all of this activity, there's a lot of activity occurring at a lot of different levels, but it all ultimately converges in one place for validation. So. But again, the key takeaway from this is about 60% of our budget is funded from restricted sources, and 40% is funded from unrestricted sources. And within those unrestricted resources, about 2/3 of those unrestricted dollars come from tuition and fees. So a very, very significant piece of our budget is dependent upon tuition and fees. Okay. And then when we flip to how do we spend our dollars and where do we spend them from, you'll see on the right-hand side of the pie, or the right-hand pie rather, or I'm sorry, left-hand pie, my apologies, is kind of a profile of how we spend our dollars. Roughly 60% is spent on people, faculty, staff, students, etc. 47%, a little under half, of salaries and wages, and about another $145 million in benefits. Then operating expenses, financial aid, about $30 million worth of debt service, and then some utilities. And when we look at that $1.2 billion budget that we will present to the board next month to approve, that budget includes activity from three, I'll call them sub-entities: the university proper, ULA, and the Research Foundation. The Research Foundation is kind of the repository and the manager, if you will, of federal grants, federal financial aid, and the clinical dollars. And EULA is, of course, athletics, and the university collects the general funds and the tuition. So we have revenues coming in from different sources, as you've seen on the previous slide, used for different things. From an expense category on the left, and they're slotted by the organizations that they're flowing through on the right. Now, just since we're talking about entities, and speaking of entities, I want to make sure that, again, to level set, that everyone understands what not only is in our budget of $1.2 billion, but more importantly, what is not included in that budget. And there's three entities that are not included in our budget: UofL Health, the hospitals, St. Mary's Elizabeth Hospital, Jewish Hospital, University Medical Center. The budgets, the revenues and expenses within the walls of those facilities are not included in our budget. They're separate organizations, separate set of books, separate budgets. The only thing that is included is when they give us money. That comes in as revenue to the university. But the patient care dollars that flow to the healthcare enterprise is not included in our budget, nor with the practice plan. That's not included in our budget, nor is the foundation operations. For example, the real estate foundation, those are not included in our budget. The only thing that's included in our budget from these other organizations is what they transfer to us or what they pay us, and it's recognized as revenues. Okay. Now, with that in mind, as if we try to answer the question, why do we budget? And it's very simple. I would submit that we budget, number one, to provide a stable financial platform for the university to operate. And within that process and that plan, we planned for potential revenue and expense changes through a risk assessment process that I've described, for example, with the 39 million, and we'll expand on as we go into next year. And we've tried to do that through a very transparent and inclusive process. We have a budget planning and monitoring committee. We also share budget information and financial information with not only the chief academic officers, but also with faculty and staff senates and subsets of those groups as well. And also across the entire. Yes, ma'am.
Dan, if you would clarify that the chief academic officers for some of our newer board members, that's really our deans. And that's it. Go on.
Thank you. So we try to make sure that our campus community has as much knowledge as possible about our financial status, our budget, because I view everyone owning that budget. We all own that budget in one way, shape, or form, and we all can influence that budget in one way, shape, or form. So that's why we budget, and we also are trying to tie it to our theme of learning, a great place to learn, work, and invest in. Although it is a little difficult in the current environment with COVID-19 to maintain that focus, but we just want the board to understand that we have not lost sight of the fact that why we're budgeting and the fact that we need to make sure that we constantly tie it in to those themes, and we're trying to do that. And as we peel away the budget and look a little deeper into some of the assumptions and scenarios, I think it might be an understatement to say that our budget is incredibly complex. We are a university, but in a lot of ways, we are like a small town, in that we have all the things that a small town would have. We have our own road system, we have our own plant, we have our own housing facilities and things like that. So we are an incredibly complex organization. And one of the things that makes it complex is that when we do a budget, it's more than a mathematical exercise. You know, anybody can do a mathematical budget, you know, to make revenues equal expenses, but we also have to manage and balance pressures. And what we wanted to basically share with you was the fact that you know, the math is one thing, but when you peel away kind of the pressures of the budget, there are certain things that we can control that pressure our budget. For example, donor activity, grant activity, institutional aid. We can make the decision on how much institutional aid we award. We can also make decisions on enrollment and tuition. So those are a little more under our control than some other things that also influence our budget. And those other things are on the perimeter: the federal budget, the perception from the public, the students' expectations, faculty and staff expectations, and time. I mean, sometimes time is not our friend. So again, we just wanted the board to see that kind of our philosophy on budgeting is more than a mathematical exercise. It's trying to be inclusive, it's trying to be transparent, it's trying to be strategic, and it's trying to balance. It's trying to balance all these pressures that some push more than others. And you know, if all these other pressures, if all these other pressures were not difficult enough to manage, COVID-19 really added a layer of complexity on top of that, and not just for us, but with others, with every other higher ed institution, and with everyone in general. And as we saw, it was swift and severe. I mean, this started in March, and we had to really react to a really bad situation to try to make sure that it didn't adversely impact our campus. And in addition to cost increases, for example, from testing, cleaning, remote work, and things of that nature, COVID-19 also placed pressure on every one of our unrestricted sources of revenue. If you go back and think in your mind that right-hand side of the pie chart, and the fact that enrollment represented a significant piece of our unrestricted revenues. That enrollment, those tuition and fees, were could all be impacted by COVID-19. And the other piece of that is the state appropriation that can be impacted by COVID-19, and the auxiliaries. So every one of our unrestricted revenue components is impacted by COVID-19. And since enrollment tuition and fees represent the majority of those, we thought it would be important to update you on where we're at from a campus perspective in terms of the academic schedule. How are we going to bring students back to campus in a safe manner? And make sure that you have that level set, or that framework, or that level of knowledge to work from as we work through the assumptions of the budget, because it's going to be very important for you to understand how we plan to do this, so that as we talk about the components of the budget, you'll be able to link the two together. You know, you may hear something about, Beth will talk about hybrid approach. Well, we'll talk about hybrid approach, how that translates to dollars from a tuition and fee standpoint. So with that, I would ask for Beth to update the board on kind of the academic plans for the fall semester. Beth, are you
Sure.
on?
Hey, everybody. I will just give you, Dan asked me to give you a very high level overview of what we are planning for fall. Before I do that, I want to sort of give credit to a lot of people. We have been planning since, April, actually, for what we would do in the fall. And we have a group that is a coordinating committee that has all the high level leadership on it. And I'm leading that group. And then we have from there multiple groups that kind of each one of us is overseeing. So Mark Watkins, for instance, is overseeing several groups that are related to facilities and operations, and making sure we have hand sanitizer and dispensers out in the fall. So the sort of pragmatic pieces of a safe return. Kevin Gardner, who is the EVPRI, and Phil Brusud, who's our campus health director, are working on safe return in terms of asking students to, and faculty and staff, to assume a certain level of responsibility for their own safety through preventive techniques like wearing masks. We will ask everyone to wear masks on the fall, at least as of now. We believe that's the right thing. Things could change in August, and we would make changes to our plan. We're also going to emphasize physical distancing rather than social distancing, because our students do want to talk to each other and learn from each other. But we're going to talk about how you physically distance and still can get to know people. One of the ways that we are going to make it possible to physically distance in the classroom, and what I'm calling a density of classroom space, like, so instead of having 100 students in a 100 person classroom, we would be better off having 50 students and having them spread out more so that they can get that physical distance. So one of the things that we are doing is we're going to a hybrid model of delivery, which means that faculty have the ability to teach between 25 and 75% of their class face-to-face. Most will probably pick around 50%. So they can maybe do a lecture online at the beginning of the week, and then bring in students half and half for the next two sessions, so that they can split them up and have some one-on-one time with students without being in a packed classroom. We are limited, of course, by our physical spaces in how many, we can't just assign every classroom to a bigger classroom, because at some point the biggest classes have nowhere to go. So we're doing some of that readjusting of classrooms, but most of it will be through hybrid delivery. And I will say that as we decided this very early in May, and as we've been talking about it, more and more universities have come out with a plan to do more hybrid education. Students are very much in favor of it. SGA did a report where they asked us to consider hybrid. They're, of course, on all of our committees, so they know what we've been talking about. It was really gratifying to see how well they put their report together and how it mirrored what the university committees had been doing. The other thing that we have decided that is, again, in line with what a lot of universities across the country are doing, we're having an on-time start, which is August 17th. We're already one of the earliest institutions to go back in the nation. But then we are going to end face-to-face instruction right before Thanksgiving. So our schedule has us meeting on Monday and Tuesday the week before Thanksgiving. Those dates people will still meet, but when students leave to go home for Thanksgiving, we will not ask them to come back. The last 2 days of classes, there are only 2 days after Thanksgiving, will be online delivery, and final exams will take place online, or final assessments in a lot of courses. And so we think this is a good idea. They don't have to come back. They go home, they hang out with their friends from high school, they bring back whatever germs their friends have from wherever they went. And so people can stay home and not come back to a classroom and put others at risk. What we will do, however, because we know that for many of our students, they don't have a place to go, we will keep our dorms open throughout the end of the semester for our students, just as we did this spring. When we talk about reopening, I think it's really important that we remember that we never closed. We had 2,700 students safely on campus all spring. We fed them, we sheltered them. They used our library, they used our SAC. And so I think it's really important to remember that we did not close our facilities. And so we feel like we can continue to be open safely. We will allow students to stay who have nowhere else to go through the Christmas holiday. Last year, for the very first time, we made a decision to keep some of our dorms open for the holiday, so that students who were international students and could not return home, students who may have had falling outs with families and had no place to go, students who were financially unable to go anywhere else over the holidays, those students had an opportunity to stay on campus. And we continue to provide one hot meal for them every day. So we intend to do the same thing for students this year. I want to talk just a little bit about hybrid. It does allow for us to de-densify the classroom, but it also prepares both faculty and students to make a quick pivot should we have to go all online again this fall. I hope that won't happen, but should it happen, our faculty and students will both have experience already working in the online environment, and it will not be such a shock to their systems as it was, I think, this year. And so that's another reason why the committee that worked chose hybrid. And then I should also say, part of our work as the academic planning scenario group was with committees in each of the units. So everybody on the academic scenario planning group led a committee in their units. So, there were representatives from all the academic colleges, and they worked with their own groups. So we got information back and forth as we were developing these plans, so that we are not just imposing these on our faculty. The faculty in the units had substantial input into the plans as they have arisen, and each unit is now working on their own plan for their course portfolio in the fall. So I'll be happy. I'm going to stop there. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And one other thing I would just say about U of L and their planning is that Mark Watkins and his group, Phil Broussoud, all of those folks had us meeting in January and February about what to do with COVID if it came. So we did have some understanding of what was coming. We didn't know how dramatic the impact would be on budgets and other things, but we have been working on this since January.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, this is John Chilton. I have two questions, I guess. How do the plans that we have compare to other universities in the state system? And do you have any, do you get any regular feedback from Frankfurt on what might be changes in the future, either through the governor's office or the Council on Post-Secondary Education?
So we are UK and U of L are ahead of the rest of the schools in our plans. Everybody has announced an intention to return. We are further ahead, and UK and I've been communicating pretty regularly with UK's provost, and we are pretty much in alignment. We went about our planning a little differently, but we have wound up in very similar spots where they are also going to have a higher proportion of their courses online in the fall, but they are going to have a hybrid model for the other courses, and they're planning on ending at Thanksgiving as well. So in that way, we're pretty much in alignment with them. Since COVID hit, CPE has been gathering its presidents. So Neely, I think, has been meeting very regularly with Aaron Thompson. Melissa Bell is the CAO for CPE, and she has been meeting we meet about every other week. We met a little bit more regularly in March and early April. But we've been meeting with all the provosts and talking about what is likely to happen. We have not gotten great guidance because I think we don't know exactly how the virus is going to play out in the fall. So I think they have been a little quiet about expectations for universities. Aaron Thompson, I know, wants universities to be open. He does not want to put a pause on our students' abilities to get their education and move on. But other than that, they have not provided a lot of guidance, but we are talking as a community of provosts pretty regularly, every other week at least now. I will also say that there are two other groups that I regularly meet with, and that's the ACC provosts. So we meet every other week virtually to talk about our plans at our campuses. And that's one of the ways I know what other institutions are doing. And then also, we're a member of the APLU, which is the Public and Land Grant University Association. And we meet very regularly, too, to talk about our plans. And so no one is acting totally alone or in completely innovative ways. We are all sort of planning along the same lines.
And John, if I may add to that, yes, Beth has been very much in a leadership role across provost trying to gather information. We've been very collaborative. And with CPE, the presidents, we were on a call every week. And I think we just decided we'd do every other week. So just so that everybody is keeping in touch and we're speaking with one voice. I can tell you that the desire to open up our campuses and have students back on campus is shared by every president in the Commonwealth. And we do have some briefings. We've had an opportunity to listen to Dr. Stack, and I believe in a couple of weeks, we'll have the governor speak to us as well. But we are trying to be proactive and act as a leadership group, all of the presidents of universities. And I wouldn't say we're lockstep, because as you heard, some of us are at different stages, but we are very aligned on the direction we want to go. And the same thing goes, as Beth said, I have really, that too has been about weekly. It'll go to bi-weekly with the presidents of the ACC and other groups as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so now that we know the campus plans for the fall, I think it's important for Jim Bagani, our enrollment management specialist and head of that unit, to brief the board on enrollment, both from the beginning of the year and a transition through summer, and then looking into next year. Jim, would you mind doing that?
Sure, thanks, Dan, and you'll be my driver around the slides there for the forwarding.
Just tell me when.
First of all, just this is, as you can imagine, has been challenging as we're working with the anxiety of students and what fall is going to look like. And so we've been very aggressive in communicating to our families and working with the great communication coming out of our university and the decisions that are being made. And that's really helped make our job easier. But we've had to really change a lot of what we've done. We've moved to, just some examples, we've moved to virtual visits very quickly. We've collaborated with other people on campus. For example, athletics helped us to do an online tour, which was great. They have great expertise in that area. And then today, we'll have our first virtual orientation, and we have 164 students that are meeting with their advisors, and we'll get signed up for their classes for the fall. And this is normally a 2-day event where they'll start coming about this time of year and then do this through June. But get started, just a quick look, first of all, with the slide that you see in front of you. And this is head count for fall, spring, and now into the summer. And we started the year down 120. And our goal, and this is in fall 19, our goal was to reverse that trend. So we really implemented and developed some strategies to really change that, to change the tide and to get us moving in the right direction. We had 64 additional students that we recruited through connections with the community college system. We looked at students that were no longer attending the university, and they're including in that number as well, and recruiting them back to complete their degree. We forgave balances for students that were in good standing at the university, and then also really targeted persistent grants, students that we could help out to continue their education here in the spring as well. And there were 21 students that were part of that group. And so that reversed the trend. And so we went from being 120 down in the fall to 50 students down in the spring. And then the COVID-19 hit, and we were faced with what summer would look like. And Dan had, as he talked about it in an earlier slide, gave us the feel for what this would look like. We have a lot of revenue that we have over the summertime, so we wanted to mitigate those losses. And through the great help of many, and our dean's units did a wonderful job of moving over 500 classes that were in person to online. So we had 1,016 courses in the summer that were fully online. And what this did, and you can see on the chart there, is that more students were taking classes. We were seeing more students that were signing up for classes. And this generated at this point an additional $2.4 million. And note that this is a year to date. The 27.6 is a year to date number. The 25.2 is a end of summer number. So this is generating an additional $2.4 million for summer over the previous year. We did a really quick survey because I got the question quite a bit of what were some of the reasons students were taking courses, and 41% there were more courses offered, and this was particularly for our students that were in our fully online coursework. So we just had more courses to offer. One of the pieces that I wondered about is, did the students just have more free time, so they were taking more courses, and that was 31% of students that indicated they just needed to occupy free time as well. So I thought you might be interested in that. Then quickly, just on the next slide, which is the FTE. So what is our full-time equivalent? And this trend from fall to spring even improved further. On the previous slide, we improved by 70. Here we improved by 101. And one of our initiatives in this area was that we contacted students that were at a part-time status, and we call it our just-in-time nudge, to talk to them about the benefits of going full-time. And we were able to transition 30 students from part-time to full-time. Next slide, Dan. So now looking forward to fall 20 here. The first piece I'm going to talk about are some leading indicators. So what are some things that we look at for, and the first slide here is going to be for freshmen, that will give us some indication that what the numbers will look like over the previous fall. Will we be ahead? Will we be behind? Will we be even? And there's two pieces that are important that I always look at. One is for our students that have applied and admitted, are they signing up for our housing? Because that's going to be an important indicator for them in terms of how many students we're going to come back in the fall. And the first chart you see there are the applications for housing. And the top is applications for first-time freshmen, same time as of May 18th for 2019, 2020. So we're up 6.5% there, but we're also up in cancellation. So the net is what's important. So overall, we're up 2% in our active applications. And I've heard Michael Martis recently say he expects to be at full capacity in the housing for the fall. So that's really good. Secondly is our students completing their financial aid form. When a student completes their financial aid form, we get what's called an ISER. This is our indication they've completed the form, and that stands for Institutional Student Information Record, kind of a fancy word, but that's the indication that they've completed their FAFSA form. And what you can see is that our residents have completed it at a rate of 3.64% higher. Our non-resident students, 18%, and our resident reciprocity Indiana here around Louisville, 10%. So overall at just over 8%. So again, another indication that that our class in the fall will be at least where it was the year before. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute. Next slide, please, Dan. And then the other piece, an important part, is our current students. So and this is for undergraduate. So how are our classes, how does our year-over-year same-date comparison students registered for the next year in college compare as a 526? So for example, I think it's good to use an example here. 77.3% of students entering in fall 2018 registered for fall 2019. This compares to 78.8% of students that entered in fall 19 and are returning in fall 20. So what all that means is that our students that are transitioning at different levels in their college career here, we're basically we're keeping students here and retaining them. This is one that that is important with everything going on with COVID-19, would our students decide to come back to the university at the same rate as they did the year before? Next slide, Dan. And this is just a current snapshot of where we are with our enrollment currently. And this is for first-time freshmen. And what you see at the top there is our applications, where we're at. So we're at 4.36% in applications, 10% in admits, and currently we're close to 3% up in deposits. So we're at 84 there. There is one caveat that I need to make sure and point out is we are up in deposits, but the next phase for a student, once they've completed their deposit, is to sign up for the orientation that I mentioned earlier to get their classes. So currently we're down about 28 students over the previous year, same date. So we're down about 28 students signing up for their summer orientation to get their classes. We're doing it very differently this year. As I mentioned, it's virtual. Before they had to make plans, they had to come to campus. It was a 2-day event, and this was a whole different process. So we feel pretty good that we'll be at least close to where we would the year before, but that unknown, that uncertainty, we'll need to make sure we keep on monitoring that. Transfer applications were pretty, in fact, the report I have this morning is we're down just one transfer application. So we're pretty close to where we were before. And that's a big group. That's 1,000 students that enter our university every fall. It's a really important part of our student population that enters in the fall. Targeted states, these are those regions that we've got recruiters in. That number is at 59, and this one has been really interesting. So these are our students that are our recruiters are in Chicago, Philadelphia, Southern California, various regions throughout the country. I wondered initially what this impact would look like. And so what I did is I had a conversation with all of our regional recruiters, got a feel for what it would look like. And most of these regional recruiting areas are in large urban, they're large urban areas. And what they said is a lot of the parents want their kids to get out of the Philadelphia area, the Chicago area. Louisville feels safer to them. So this number's continued to hold really strong. The flip of that is if there was a reason that we did need to go fully online, which we're not at this point, that would dramatically change the number of students that we would be seeing coming from these regions. So it's going to be an important thing to monitor as well.
Hey,
Dan, next slide. Oh.
Jim, before you go, Dr. Burse had a question about transfers. We had transfers, let's see, this was on the 20th, of 62 up. And he asked, did you say that transfers are down one student? Did 62 up change to 1 down, or?
I'm sorry, yeah, let me clear. The minus 58, the admit number is now -1 as of this morning. I just looked at it before we got on.
Okay, so it's the applications are still positive.
Yes, they're
this
still
is just
positive.
less negative, almost
Yes.
back to break even.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So the last slide that I have here is looking at fall 20 enrollment projections. And so what you'll see there is I have overall -223. And let me talk to you about what I'm doing with this. So I'm assuming within that -223 at this point that there's a 1% decline in retention. So earlier I showed you the slide that we're about even. We've been trending about 1% behind, and I'm accounting for some impact of the COVID-19 here. And so I'm slightly potentially conservative, but it's probably a pretty good assumption at this point. We also, one of the pieces that we did is we released our holds this year, given everything that was going on. And so we need to see what that impact is going to fully be as our students are transitioning into the fall. But we do have almost 80% of our students are registered for the fall at this point. So we're well down that track past the halfway point in terms of where we're going to be. We're also seeing some lag, as I mentioned. I have a note here of the freshmen registered that are signing up for the orientations over the summer being minus 28. So we're really going to need to keep an eye on that. We're doing a lot of work of making sure while we're up in deposits, we're moving those students to get signed up for their orientation for the summer. I do feel pretty good that we can get that number to at least even, but we do have some work to do there. So I will certainly not say that that's a done deal at this point. And then finally, my note is on the law school. That is down, you'll see at minus 20. They had a large class leave last year. It was, I believe, their largest in the history of the university that entered, and that they have now left. And so they're entering more of a steady state. And so that number is down, particularly because of that large class leaving. And Dan, that's what I have.
Any questions for Jim? Okay, so as we take the pressures that we spoke about, the campus status and the enrollment landscape, we began to form a bit of a risk assessment. And even though these are in columns, each cell is mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is what we want to try to do is plan for as much as we possibly can. And we've looked at things in kind of three broad categories. What's the least adverse scenario or impacts within a least adverse scenario? What about moderate? And then what, most adverse? And at the very top, you'll see that the least adverse is basically business as usual. Campus classes in person, campus looks today and operates like it did this time last year. Moderate, it gets back to Beth's point about some hybrid classes, but mostly in person. And Lord forbid, the most adverse is that basically everything goes online and flips to online. And within that, within each one of those, we assessed what would happen to student retention, what would happen to first-time freshmen, what would happen to total undergraduate, and then we also looked at other factors, mainly the ones that influence our unrestricted revenues. State tax collections, what would happen if state tax collections, how would that impact our budget? Anywhere from no change to a 17% change. Federal and state aid, we have not only applications out through the governor's office for additional CARES Act money, but also through FEMA. What would happen with housing and some other auxiliaries, sponsored research, and then finally athletics. So we looked at what are the things that could happen and how, what are the degrees of difficulty we could experience. The next step was we translated those to dollars. What would happen, for example, under the least adverse, as Jim mentioned, we were already looking at starting from an equilibrium standpoint, a balanced budget standpoint. If our enrollment's down a little, about 130 in the least adverse scenario, that's about a $1.9 million loss. Law school, about $500,000 loss. And we'll talk about tuition repricing here in a few moments for online. And the least adverse scenario from a state appropriation standpoint, about 3.2 million. Housing, again, back to what could happen with almost the same level of activity from last year. We also looked at expenditure risks. Some of these are fixed, utility cost increases, employee health insurance, continuing the 2% raise that was implemented last year. Remember, it was implemented halfway through the year, so now it annualizes this year. Additional costs related to making sure that the campus is safe for the faculty, staff, and students. We also have some base budget commitments that annualize this year to about $5.7 million that were started last year, but they annualize in their commitments for this year. Central financial aid increases, and also we are going to have to make an investment in our enterprise risk or enterprise resource system, our computing system. Everything from the student system to our financial systems, HR systems. Basically, our PeopleSoft system is going to need a major overhaul, and we're going to have to put probably $5 million per year into that, probably for about the next 7 to 10 years. So it's going to be a major investment. We need to start making those investments now. So again, as we started to try to translate those risks to dollars and kind of bolting together a budget based on what we know at a certain point in time. Some of these expenses could be based on the least adverse situation. Some of them could be based on the most adverse. It just depends. And that's the part that we're going through now. But to us, the first step of this was very much like we did with the $39 million problem. What could go wrong and how badly could it go wrong? Okay. So, but within, as we start to answer the question, how can we address the things that could go wrong? Okay, there are a couple of kind of guardrails that we need board input related to, and the first of which is tuition. If we start with the top line revenue, if you will, what decisions do we need to make on tuition? Because we need to make a couple of decisions that are quite important, and both financially and also from a competitive standpoint and a strategic standpoint. And the first of which is the tuition proposal, the rates themselves, and then also a restructuring of online. And I would like Rick to kind of jump in, because you're probably tired of hearing from me, Rick to jump in to talk about the tuition proposal and also the online rate resetting, that kind of a continuation of something we did in the summer that was quite successful. So Rick, you want to?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. So we'll go to the next slide. So as a quick overview, where we are with our proposed tuition rates for next year is, I'm kind of working backward order. And I'll start with the rate increases first in the table, and then explain how we got to those proposed rate increases. So in the table, what you can see is for undergraduate, resident, and graduate resident, we're proposing a 2% increase. So the in-state resident rate currently is $5,866 per semester. And the proposal is to increase it by $117 to, just mute yours.
Hey, Rick, this is Neely. Would everybody else mute your phones, mute yourselves? That will help with the echo. Go ahead, Rick.
Rate is $5,866 for full-time. So a resident student who takes at least 12 credit hours, that's the rate that they pay. The proposal is to increase it by 2%, or $117 per semester. And then the non-resident undergraduate, the rate would increase by the same dollar amount as that 2% increase. So their rates would go from that $13,879 currently per semester for full-time to $13,996, which is that $117 increase. The graduate works very much the same way. The in-state rates would go up by 2%, and then the non-resident rates would increase by the same dollar amount, which is the $130 that you can see on that table. On the professional school side, we actually went to the deans. So every dean each dean of the professional schools provided input into what their rate changes should be for next fiscal year. They're the closest to their student market, to the demand, and they have the best sort of way to kind of see what's tolerable from a rate increase. And law school is recommending a 3% increase to the resident rates and the same dollar amount as the 3% increase for the non-residents. And dentistry and medicine are proposing increases across the board for both resident and non-resident. Dentistry, it's 3%, medicine, it's 2.5%. So now let me just walk back real briefly to how we got there. And it starts with a committee that Provost Bain put together. Every year, she convenes a group of faculty, staff, students, deans, and associate deans as well, and charges them with looking at what the rate structure should be for the upcoming academic year. And that group met from October through April and considered a lot of factors in coming up with a proposal. And it really was focused on student affordability. That was the primary focus. And by the way, Dr. Gail Dupuy from the Speed School and I were the ones who co-chaired that committee. So it had really good representation from the academic units to make sure that we were grounding any of the recommendations in sort of the academic setting. And the proposal that came out of that group was to arrange for undergraduate students to increase the rates by between 2 and 4% for resident students and the same dollar amount for non-resident students. So as I mentioned earlier, the proposal is 2%. So we went with the lowest range that this task force recommended. And then for graduate, it was the very same range recommendation, 2 to 4% resident, and then the same dollar amount for non-resident. And again, we went with the lowest, which is 2%. Now, one thing I have to make sure that everyone understands as well about tuition rates is the Council on Post-Secondary Education, they have statutory authority to approve all tuition rates at public universities in Kentucky. So we do have to take our tuition rate proposals to the CPE board for final approval, and that is happening. I think their next board meeting is in the end of June. One other little caveat, that little twist to this process, is CPE also does set a limit, or has the authority to set a limit on the increase in resident undergraduate tuition rates. This is a very unusual year, of course, because of COVID, and they only set a rate 1 year out, and that's mainly because the state budget, for instead of being a biennial budget, is just a 1 year budget next year. And what they did is, after a lot of consideration, a lot of deliberation, a lot of feedback from us and UK and others, they decided not to set a limit on the resident undergraduate tuition rate increase. So there is no cap. In prior years, they would typically set it at 2 to 3%. For this next academic year, there is no limit. So that being said, a 2% increase is clearly within the cap that CPE would impose. There's a lot there, but I'm going to move on maybe to the next slide if no one has any questions.
Hey, Rick, this is Mary. I have a question because, and I apologize, I had to answer my front door, so I may have missed this. But if I recall last year, we set the in-state and out-of-state at the same percentage. And this year we're setting them at the same dollar amount. Is my memory correct?
I believe, yeah. So you're stressing my memory on that as well, but I believe that's what we did. It was the same percentage increase.
Yeah. So obviously a percentage increase on out of state would be a larger dollar amount. What was the rationale for using dollars instead of a percentage to set those?
So a lot of conversation occurred around exactly that point, and Jim Bogani, who's also on that committee, can provide some additional color to this area as well. But the sense was, and I'll get to this in the next couple slides actually, the sense is that our non-resident tuition rates are actually pretty high relative to other benchmark institutions. They're really in line with UK, which is our in-state competitor, but they're a little bit high compared to some of our other regional competitors and benchmark competitors. So not increasing the non-resident rate by as large of a percentage was considered to be a more palatable approach for those non-resident students. Okay. So what I mentioned in part of this consideration of the tuition rate recommendations is the task force really looked at tuition rate sensitivity. So if we increased our rates, what would that look like in comparison to the UK? And UK, in some cases, are a competitor, in other cases maybe less so, but they're clearly in-state, so it does represent a good sort of way to benchmark our rates. So this first slide, what it does is it shows University of Kentucky's undergraduate resident tuition rate for the entire academic year, so fall and spring, and that's for this current fiscal year, which is $12,360. And what it does is it shows if we increase our rates by 2%, we still are about $392 less over the academic year in tuition cost relative to UK, of course, assuming that they don't raise their tuition rates this coming year either. So that's just kind of a way to measure where we are relative to UK and ensure that we're not pricing ourselves out of the market, if you will. Can we go to the next slide? If we look at non-resident undergraduate, you can see the very similar story. The proposal that I just went through on 2 slides ago, it's really about a 1% increase in non-resident undergraduate tuition rates. And if we increase our rates by 1%, we still will be $2,600 less than UK's current rates for non-resident undergraduates. And then the next slide shows graduate resident rates comparing us to UK. Again, with a 2% increase in resident graduate rates, we still have lower rates than UK's current year rates. And then the last comparison is our graduate non-resident rates to UK. And even with a 1% increase, we're well below UK's existing rate. In this case, it's about $5,200 for the academic year. So that's just a way for us to make sure that if we do increase the rates as proposed, we're not misaligning our rates with the University of Kentucky. And I think those slides kind of make sure that we're in that range. Okay. The next part of the conversation, what Dan talked about a few slides ago, is there's another part to our tuition price restructuring. The rates were the first part, but we also have a really significant change to how we price online tuition. And Dan mentioned earlier that we basically have already done this for this summer session. We did it because all of our courses were moved online, and that really caused us to rethink and then implement a significant change to how we price our online tuition. So just a real briefly, I want to make sure everyone understands where we currently are, what our current online pricing structure is. And it's a 2-tiered system. So that means that there's one rate for in-person courses, and then there's another rate for online courses. And that online rate has always been greater than the in-person rate for resident students. For non-resident students, though, the online rate is actually a lot less than the in-person rate. So you can see there's a lot of sort of a difference going on in our rate structure. So here's a quick example. Our resident students currently pay $489 per credit hour to take an in-person class. If they take that resident undergraduate students takes an online class, they pay $539 per credit hour. So they're paying a premium. And part of that premium is due to a variety of historical, it's due to historical decisions because our online tuition rates have always been higher than our in-person rate. So going back to 1999, when we first went into the online area, our online rates have always been higher than our resident in-person rates. But it's also been a reflection of the upfront and the technological costs associated with putting content online. It's not free. I mean, there are really significant costs for example, Blackboard. That's the online sort of medium upon which content is delivered. So there are some costs associated with that. But we need to recognize that there are changes underfoot, not just because of COVID, but we've heard for years from students, for example, that our online tuition structure is not something that they find particularly palatable. I will add, though, that our demand for online courses has been increasing every year for probably the past 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So we have seen a clear increase in student demand for those courses, but I think we're seeing some pressure on the pricing that we've associated with our online tuition rates. So what will change then under this proposal? And it's really like 3 different areas. The first is we're going to eliminate the difference between in-person and online rates. So for a resident undergraduate student, for example, they will see one rate, whether it's for an in-person course or an online course. And for non-resident students, it would be the same way. And again, we really did that for this summer. So students this summer, they saw one rate for courses that they enrolled in, and it obviously all of our courses were online, but we did that because it no longer felt appropriate to charge students a higher rate to take an online course when prior to the virus and prior to COVID-19 issues, they may have taken an in-person class, and those resident students who took an in-person class would have paid that lower rate. So we just went ahead and charged everybody the lowest rate that was possible. And for example, those resident undergraduate students, it would have been the in-person rate. Now, the second change that we're talking about making, and this is the really significant one, we currently charge students tuition on every online credit hour that's above load. And Dan mentioned this, I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but for example, if there's an undergraduate student who enrolls in 12 credit hours, which is the full-time threshold for undergraduate students, and then they take 1 credit hour additional, so they take 13 credit hours. If that 13th credit hour was in person, there's no charge. But if they took that 1 credit hour and it was online, that student would then be charged the online per credit hour rate. And that would continue all the way up. So if they took 3 credit hours online above 12, they paid $539 times 3, or about $1,600 for that additional 3 credit hour course. That is going to go away, and that's the proposal, is to just blend that total charge into the upfront full-time rate. So no longer will there be charges for online credit hours above load. And we'll get into the dollar amounts in a little bit. And that's a very significant change, but we really do think this is the right approach. It benefits students, as I'll talk about in a minute, and it really addresses a longstanding need that students have had in this area. The other last part to the tuition price restructuring is we're going to eliminate those online charges above load, but because every credit hour above load would then be free, meaning a student could take any number of credit hours as an undergraduate above 12 and pay nothing, we thought it was appropriate to recognize that the university still incurs costs from instructing those courses above load and establishing a minimum fee at a higher threshold. In this case, it's 16 or above for undergraduates and 12 or more for graduates, was an appropriate sort of mechanism to follow. And that fee would be $75 per credit hour at those high threshold rates. So the last area just to cover is the impacts here to students. What these changes will do is encourage students to take more credit hours and put them on path to graduate within 4 years as an undergraduate, because to graduate in 4 years, you have to take 15 credit hours per semester, which gets you to that 120 credit hours over 4 years. And right now, a lot of students are just above the 12 credit hour average. So we hope this encourages students to take more credit hours because the cost has been diminished for those online courses. And it also saves them money, right? They don't have to pay tuition, room and board, had they had to stay for an extra semester on campus, and it gets them into the workplace sooner as well. And as I mentioned, it addresses a very longstanding concern that students have had about our online tuition pricing structure. And then the last benefit is we actually are proactively addressing what could be a very similar situation this fall to what we've encountered this summer. So if we had to flip our rate structure, if we did not make these changes in the middle of the semester, it would be a challenge for the students and for the university. So the slide on the screen now just kind of walks through what those changes mean in terms of a dollar amount. And the biggest impact is not charging tuition for online courses above load. By not doing that, the university will forego $6.5 million in tuition. That's a huge, huge loss of revenue, But again, I think it's the right thing to do given everything that's been occurring with COVID and what we've already done for this upcoming summer term. Now, the other two components are are also at play here as well. And the first is by equalizing the online and in-person rates, there still is a net loss of about $1 million. And then the last part is by assessing that nominal fee per credit hour at those high credit hour thresholds, the university will actually generate a little bit more revenue, about $1 million. So those second and third points really kind of net out. And the university, we're still at a loss of about $6.5 million. So that kind of walks us through very high level, maybe more detail, hopefully a sufficient amount of detail to explain why we're doing it and what the impacts are going to be, not only on students, but also on the university as well. So we're good with tuition, if there are no questions. Then the second area, which really now looks at the expense side of the decision process that Dan laid out at the very beginning. Remember, there were three sort of little areas or buckets, the first being tuition. The second that we're looking for, endorsement or guidance on is setting the unit contingency at 5%. We currently have a 1% contingency in the budget, the FY 2020 budget, and that was a new element or wrinkle to our budget. We had never done that before. And Dan had made that proposal last year, and I think it's been really, really useful because it got every unit to think about setting aside money to make sure that there was a savings account available to them should they need it throughout the fiscal year. Now, the proposal is to increase that from 1% to 5% for next year's budget, and that 5% represents about $17 million. And Dan talked about the risks that are already sort of at play and the uncertainty associated with some of those revenue risks. We don't know. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty still, even though we have a lot of good trend data on the enrollment side, for example, but we don't know where state appropriations will land. It's likely that there will be another state budget cut next fiscal year based upon information that the tax revenues that the state is looking at. And it's appropriate, it's prudent to go ahead and have every unit across campus set aside a larger pool of funds to be able to handle any sort of revenue threats or expenditure changes that impact the university budget next year. That just gives us a layer of flexibility in managing any sort of risks next fiscal year. So that then brings us to the third and final layer or element of the decision process that we laid out before you. I think Dan's going to go ahead and walk through those.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. So any questions up to this point? No. Okay.
Dan, there are two questions. One from Randy and one from Sabrina.
Okay, Randy, in terms of freezing the resident rate and increasing the non-resident rate, it would take, in order to kind of backfill or make up for that 2% loss on the resident tuition, because they represent 75% of the revenue pool, I think we'd have to do much more than a 3% increase. And then I think we start to perhaps compromise our position in the marketplace. In other words, we may start to overprice ourselves related to competitors. I think it would take a much larger than a 3% increase to break even on that.
Hey, Dan, I did run the numbers on the back. I just used the two. Your 3%'s on a much larger base of tuition than the one. I had just a little Excel spreadsheet. I think it comes fairly close. It's within spitting distance at 3% versus 0 based upon a 75-25 split. If the revenue per tuition was equal, you're right, it would take more, but the tuition for out of state's more. So I think my number is, that I looked at, and I obviously was doing it behind the scenes, was that, if you did on a 25-75, we'd come out with, a touch less revenue, but not material.
Yeah, the other thing that factors into that is the scholarshiping. I mean, behind the scenes, there's also some scholarshiping that kind of buys that down, if you will, or lessens that net cost to the non-resident students. We probably scholarship. I want to say it's around. I'd have to get the number, but memory lapse. The tuition discounting for the non-residents, we take it down, I want to say close to 30%. So, you know, on the sticker price, it's one thing, but we'd have to run that through the scholarshiping calculator to see what the true net is.
Yeah, it might be helpful because to see like what is the net revenue per in-state versus out-of-state, because wouldn't scholarships impact net paid on the in-state?
Yes, it would.
Can we get that analysis?
Yes.
I mean, it just appears to me that, you know, the strategy, I thought Mary had a great question that somehow we're favoring our out-of-state students. And again, in looking at the charts that were presented, now that's only UK peer data. I can't say how out-of-state looks to our other peers, Cincinnati, you know, whoever else is in our region. That might be helpful too, and you all probably looked at that. But again, I think the math, you know, could work in some way. But anyway, all right.
Okay.
We're glad to bring that, and this time we are more sensitive. I think you raised really good points, and this is something we've been wrestling with because how willing are people to travel farther away under COVID, et cetera. But we'll bring that to you.
No, it's tricky. It's not math. It's an art. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's see. I think Beth had addressed Sabrina's question. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move on. Rick had talked about the 5% contingency withhold as kind of the first strategy, or the savings account, if you will, within the colleges. There are some other strategies as we think about all those risks from that one slide that we looked at. What are the other things what are the other levers that we can pull? It's a matter of what are they and how hard do we pull them? And what we are going to build into the budget is basically a continuation of the strategies that we did as part of the $39 million program that we just successfully implemented. And they include limits on hiring and other non-essential expenses. Continuing, one option is to continue the pay reductions for the faculty and staff earning over $100,000, and also continue to reduce the employer contribution on the retirement. You know, we took it down to zero employer contribution for 3 months. We've also, you'll see in a few moments, we've modeled that in a few different ways at a few different levels. Continue the other pay reductions, also perhaps continue furloughs, and utilize university reserves. You know, we've tried to really, over the last couple of years, build up our reserves. We may have to open those reserves and use some of those on a one-year basis to help offset some of the risks that we have. You know, I don't like to use reserves unless it's for a one-time purpose. This may be a one-time purpose. And when we get into some of the more adverse scenarios, that right-hand column that we looked at a few moments ago, the most adverse, frankly, we may have to start to look at layoffs. Again, that's not a preferred option, but you know, from a fiduciary standpoint, you as the board would expect us to be able to lay out what are the best case, the middle of the road case, and the worst case scenarios, and what are you going to do about it? And we have to talk about that as part of the worst case scenario. It's not something we like to talk about, but it's something that you know, we as stewards of the dollars and stewards of the resources have to do. And as we translate those to dollars, same philosophy that we looked at on the risks, as we translate those mitigation examples to dollars, you'll see that the revenue triggers are at the upper section of the page, what a 2% increase looks like, what the graduate enrollment, we're on a trend of positive graduate enrollment this year. The state support, both from FEMA and the CARES Act through the governor's office, what that could look like. Again, we've already applied for those dollars, and also the foundation. The foundation will undoubtedly reduce the spend from the endowment in the upcoming year because of the situation with the market at the end of December and their cautious approach, which is rightfully so, but their cautious approach to make sure that the endowment stays as whole or intact as possible. We have built up, units and colleges have built up significant carryover in the foundation. And again, it's not a bad thing to use carryover or use fund balance or use reserves as long as it's done strategically and for one-time purposes. And that's a trigger that we could use. On the expense offset sides, we've talked about the 5% contingency. Let's put 5% of the unit budgets in a savings account. Athletics has done a very good job of proactively addressing their budget shortfall for next year. So from a least adverse and a moderate perspective, they'll balance their budgets. We also are looking at within those auxiliaries, those that are sensitive to enrollment, for example, housing and parking. There are also some expense reductions that they can deploy to help reduce the loss of revenues to those areas. We can also use the employer retirement match as a trigger. As I mentioned a few moments ago, as part of the $39 million program, we reduced it to zero. The employer contribution to the retirement plan for 90 days was reduced to zero. If we want to ease that up a little bit next year, for example, we could reinstate it to either 5%. In a least adverse case scenario, we could reinstate it to 2.5% base on a moderate, or we could continue at zero if under a most adverse situation. The same thing with the pay raises for the folks over $100,000. And under the least adverse situation, what this would mean is we would continue that pay reduction for 7 months. That's what it would take to balance things under a least adverse situation. It would take 9 months under a moderate situation, and it would take, we say 11 months, but it's annual under a most adverse situation, number one. And number two is under a most adverse situation, we could also increase that reduction. In other words, instead of a 10% pay reduction for people over 300,000, it would be a 15%. Basically, you just increase the reductions by half, or to 150% of the current rate. Furloughs are another area as we start to, as we look at moderate and more adverse situations, especially the most adverse situation where we basically don't have the activity on campus that we normally would. We would have to, furloughs are an option for that. And other measures are items that we're looking at. We don't have the triggers designed to pull yet, but we have a general idea of what those would be. And again, that is under the most adverse situation where we are totally online. There are no students on campus or very few students on campus, and frankly, the likelihood of that happening, hopefully, is next to nothing. And then, last but not least, the discussion of university reserves. How much would we draw down on our university reserves, on our cash reserves that we've looked at and tried to build up over the last couple of years. And again, each one of these, it's not just the columns, but it's also the rows are mutually exclusive as we go through and we start to finalize what we want to do on tuition, what we want to do on online pricing, and what the state budget looks like over the next couple of weeks. If enrollment doesn't change from where it's at now, that all helps us choose from a menu of these expense offset options to build next year's budget. But again, we just wanted to make sure that the board was aware of what these were, how they could be used to help offset the various scenarios that we're looking at. Okay. The one thing that I think we need to focus on, one of the things rather that we need to focus on is, as we build a budget, there are certain things that we haven't touched. We talked about the expense levers to help influence or offset the risks from the situations, but there's some things that we haven't touched. there's still good things happening. Number one is we do not have plans at this point to increase the monthly insurance premiums or health insurance premiums on our employees. Costs will go up, but the institution will fund those costs, not the employees. They will not be passed on to the employees. We don't have plans on changing the tuition remission program for the employees or dependents. We're still investing in student financial aid, our institutional aid. We continue to support the staff and student emergency funds to help them during their trying times, and we're also continuing to fund the mental health services for students. We're currently adding counselors to that. So, even though we're facing a very, very difficult time, we are trying our best to protect the students, the employees, but also make sure that the institution has the financial base to be able to continue and stay healthy over the long haul. I'd like to at least close out on my comments with kind of the next steps. What we would like is an endorsement of the general budget assumptions here in terms of repricing the online tuition, the concept of a 2% fee increase, mainly so we can start, especially the online, so we can start advertising it, because I think that gives us a competitive advantage over some of the other institutions in the state. And with that, we would, with those two things, we can take that and we can finalize a budget and combine that with time over the next couple of weeks as things evolve. As the state's just opening things up on June 1st. If that goes well, then we have our level of confidence is higher and higher to move from perhaps that moderate category to the least adverse in certain things. So we can start to get a clearer picture of what our true costs may or may not be. And with that, we can then build a more detailed presentation of the budget down to the college level. And also within those organizations, UofL and a research foundation that I mentioned earlier on, and we can build that more detailed budget to share with you before the June meeting for approval at the June meeting. And we can put a ribbon, if you will, on the 2021 budget, at least for now. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions, engage in conversation, whatever the committee deems appropriate.
Hey, Dan, you've got several questions in the chat. There's one from John Chilton asking about UofL's enrollment trends, which, look remarkable compared to what all of us have been reading, and asking how that compares to other universities in the region and in the ACC. And then I think there's two questions from Raymond. One about, I thought the board voted to eliminate the foundation carryovers. And then, boy, this goes all the way back to when David Grissom was chairing the board, when there was a request to take another look at our health insurance plans to see if there were any cost saving opportunities there. So Raymond's asking, has there been any progress on that? Yes. And then there's now another question from Randall. So if you pull up the chat, some of these have been answered as we've gone along, but there's still some outstanding that I think we ought to get answered before we get some consensus on blessing the suggestions you all put forward.
Okay. Mary, while Dan takes a moment to look at the questions, I'll take the enrollment one. I would say that from what we are hearing, UofL is actually doing, knock on wood, very well. The challenge for us is we're trying to make sure that it all materializes. People show up, they're here. It's hard work by a lot of people. And I want to commend Jim Begani, his job, all of the deans, Beth Fame, Dan Durbin, a whole lot of people who've been tracking that and paying attention to it. So right now we look very favorable, as John said, but again, I'm always cautious. I want to make sure that students show up first day of classes and that we do well. And then on health insurance, we did actually have a group that we formed on benefits, and Dan might take that. So we had a pretty broad group that started looking at all of our benefits, and on health insurance, it turned out we were actually doing all right, but we can do a more detailed dive into that, or Dan may add more color right now.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And the other thing we did, and I think Mary Elizabeth Miles is on the phone, our HR VP.
I am.
Thank you. We also had a pretty in-depth discussion with our hospital system to look at possibly some synergies between us and them, or a little closer relationship. Frankly, one of the things that it was going to do was really kind of change a lot of the benefits, maybe not as much as the cost, but a lot of the benefits that we currently have, that our employees currently have, like emergency room deductibles and things like that. And you know, we were in the middle of a budget year with salary reductions and things like that, and we thought that might trying to move too quickly on that might shock the system a little bit. But Mary Elizabeth, would you mind giving the board a little update in terms of what we're looking at from a health insurance standpoint to try to trim costs?
You mean for our 2021?
Yes.
Oh, yes. One of the things that we are looking at is currently we have seed money that we provide to our employees with our HRA plans. We have two of them, a high plan and a low plan. And currently we have 3 times rollover plus the current year amount, which depending on which plan you're in, with family being the highest amount of seed money, which is $2,000, $8,000 is how much an employee could have at one time. We are looking at right sizing that and changing that rollover to 1 times the rollover plus the current year. You know, we looked at industry standards and best practices, et cetera. However, we are not going to take anything from our current employees. So any balances that they currently have, those will be grandfathered. It is an action that we will be taking moving forward. In addition to that, we are looking at the deductibles. Dan, is this the level of detail that you wanted me to update you on?
Yeah, I think that I think it would be helpful.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I didn't know. I just wanted to be sure before I kept talking. As far as our deductible, all of our deductibles are in line except for our PPO deductibles. And so there will be a $5 increase to the PPO deductibles. So for savings, we certainly have added those things. But if I could just say, we have also offset some of those changes with the fact that we are now going to have 0 deductibles for any maintenance drugs that are generic. So high blood pressure, high cholesterol, employees will no longer have to pay deductibles. And for us, that's going to be, for them, certainly that's going to be helpful from a cost savings perspective. And for the plan itself and for our healthy employees, making sure that they don't have any barriers to keep, to maintain their health, we feel like that's a huge win. So I think I've got them all. I wasn't prepared. Dan, is there anything I'm missing that you wanted me to talk about?
No, I think we've hit that, and we've also hit the fact that we have tried to, well, not tried, but we have engaged with the health system to see if there's some synergies there.
Oh, yes. And I did make a note before COVID, actually probably a couple of months, we did have a meeting with our partners over at UofL Health to just talk about where it makes sense. And we just haven't had a chance to get back to the table, but it's certainly something that Dan and I want to look into.
Okay. let's see, I'm going through the questions. Sorry about that. Let's see, health insurance, foundation carryover. We do, at the end of April, we still have about $27 million of carryover from previously declared endowment spend. And what we're facing is this year, for example, the foundation allocated about $18 million worth of spend. And next year, they do not feel that they can do that. They are actually looking at somewhere around a $8 or $9 million allocation to spend, and we're currently working with them to try to figure out what that means in terms of shortfalls. What budget problems does that create, and that type of thing, in the colleges? Because again, we went out in the spring assuming that the market would hold, and then COVID tanked things at the end of December, and the foundation wants to try to be as cautious as possible and try to let their portfolio rebound. So that carryover is still in the foundation. I'm not sure when we say the board voted to eliminate foundation carryovers, I'd have to go back and look. I don't recall being part of that conversation, but it may have been before my time, but I don't know if it's a matter of we have to request it or something. But again, I think we're going to have to draw on that money, or that in addition to the reductions that we're looking at on the university side, we're going to have to deploy some reserves, and those dollars are over there for deployment.
I think it might be two different concepts. Dan, we can follow up later. Keith has a clarification here. We can follow up on that, because the way we have presented it is exactly as Dan said, where we're encouraging units to use up the funds that they might have been holding on to, because a lot of times it's because that you have to recruit a chair for some department. And to do that, you need X amount of dollars to provide a startup package to recruit them. And so units might be saving up those dollars to try to accrue enough that they can do that. Every one of those we're looking at now. Again, as Dan said, we fully recognize that this year we don't know what the returns will be from the market. And so we're working in a very collaborative fashion with the foundation. Keith and Dan are going through very carefully what we have to try to make the best of a very tough situation.
And if I may add, the process for budgeting those foundation funds has changed about 180 degrees from the past. Okay, in the past, the foundation declared a spend of X and the money was transferred to the money was made available to the colleges. This year, we went to the colleges first and asked them, what are your budgeted needs for these dollars? And both today, next year, and the year after. So we had a very clear picture on what they needed for the next 3 years. Okay, and that helped us kind of build a path, if you will, to determine how much of this carryover needed to be used over the next few years. Now, when COVID-19 and the market situation from COVID-19 emerged and the market went down, now we have to go back to the colleges and say, look, we understand things were a different under different set of conditions a few months ago. If this is available to you now, how does this change your plans? For example, you may not hire the chair, you may not start a research enterprise, you may not be applying for a grant that you needed a one-time cost sharing for, or something of that nature. We're going to have to go back and kind of recalibrate that. But the budgeting on those dollars, I just want to make sure that the board understands the budgeting on those dollars has changed significantly from just I'll call it a non-strategic, blanket spend, to a more strategic, what do you need? And then we figure out how we meet those needs.
We will follow up on anything that was raised and any other questions you may have. If you want to bring them up now or send it to us. Mary Nixon, anything else?
No, I think we've covered everything, and I think again, I know that Diane and I have had some incremental visibility to all the work and debate that's gone into this, and I applaud the entire team for jumping on this quickly. I think in understanding the risks that we face and coming up with pretty concrete plans to get us through the balance of this year and start thinking about this upcoming fiscal year. I know I am comfortable with the direction of this and the recommendations, and you all continuing to sharpen your pencils and finalize it. If anybody's got any concerns or thing they think need further debate, you know, I would raise them now or ask that you let Dan know pretty shortly, so that they don't spend a lot of time going in a direction that you might not be supportive of.
And Mary, this is Diane. I would just reiterate that I think I had another conversation with Dan even again this morning, and they're doing their best to consider all possibilities, but this is a moving target. As he said, and one number could look better and the other number look worse, but at least we've got a matrix to track it. And the best, in my mind, the best use of a budget is to monitor your own conclusions and force you to make decisions. So I think they're doing a good job.
Thank you.
Mary, one last thing is that I saw Jim Pagani added a comment that we compare ourselves to 14 peer institutions and we're one of 2. That shows an increase. So that's very, very good news at this point. But again, as always, with all of these, we're monitoring them extremely closely.
Well, I think anybody that's running a business or working on other boards knows that setting budgets right now, when there are a lot of things out of our control and the assumptions that you usually build a budget on are just, unpredictable and fluid right now. I think we've got a good handle on what the risks are, on mitigating strategies to address those risks. And, I applaud you for going through the work, Dan, you and your team, and the everybody that was involved in that process of coming up with sort of best case, worst case, and moderate case. And I think, in terms of the things that you are asking for us to be aligned on, which are, along the lines of what you're doing with tuition, what you're thinking about in terms of levers, I'm comfortable with that. So I would ask that anybody that isn't or wants further analysis on anything to let Dan and Diane, our finance chair, know as soon as possible, because we've got, our upcoming committee meetings in a couple of weeks.
Mary? Did she hear me?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. This is Raymond. I guess I don't have any questions about what was put out there. I guess I guess as I look forward, looking to something else. One of the old adages is don't let a good crisis go to waste. And while we're in this process, I guess I like to know, or at least think about, what kinds of things are we can do structurally or policy wise to better align where we want the university to go in regards particularly to the strategic plan. So in terms of seeing how what it is we do aligns with moving that direction is something I like to see when the document comes out.
Yeah, and I know that I've had those conversations with with Dan, Neely, Michael Wade. I know the team has had their own conversations about that, if there's a time to make some tough decisions, as you said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I feel pretty comfortable that there's some work that's been done in that area. But yeah, I think we can share more on what those thoughts are as we get closer to the committee meetings.
Okay.
That's a good point. Anybody else? Okay, Dan, I think great job. I think that's licensed to keep moving forward.
We certainly will. We never stopped.
Well, don't we know that?
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning.
Yeah, stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.